Hello, I'm Dan Gibson, and this is another question and answer video. In this video, we want to answer two similar questions. First, several people have asked, is the Kaaba building an Indian Shiva temple? And then more specifically, Dr. Ajay Sharma, an associate professor of geography in India, asks, is there any relationship between Nabatean carving and Indian art? Both of these are good questions, and I hope I can answer them successfully. First of all, I don't believe that the Kaaba was ever a Shiva temple. From my research, it seems that the Hindus worshipped Lord Shiva as one of many gods. So some of them have identified things in Islam that are similar to what they see in the worship of Lord Shiva. So let's examine some of these, and I will comment on them. You see, when we consider Petra as the location of the first Kaaba, rather than Mecca in Saudi Arabia, things begin to take on a different perspective. Now, first, these Muslims like the idea that there were 360 idols in the Kaaba. So this makes it seem like a Hindu place to them. Hindus have many gods, and so it seems to be an immediate connection. However, when we are considering pagans everywhere, all of them had many gods. The Greeks, the Romans, even the Vikings. The odd thing about the Kaaba is that all of these gods, Nasub is the word that is used here, or sacred items. They're not just idols, they're sacred things that were gathered into one place. Now, that's strange. I mean, these are standing objects, and some of them were pictures, for instance. They're not all standing objects. For instance, there was a picture of Abraham and Ishmael standing together holding divination arrows. Another of these sacred Nasub was a picture of Mary holding baby Jesus. Along with this, there was the idol of Hubal and different other idols that were there. Now, in ancient times, each god usually had its own sacred place of worship. You would expect pictures of Mary to be in a church. So how could there be 360 sacred objects all gathered together? Now, one thing we do know about the history of Petra and of the area is that it was prone to earthquakes. It was, and so the Kaaba was a small, low, square structure. It wasn't a flimsy thing. It was a plain structure. It had no decorations on it like Indian things, temples do. And so when the earthquakes happened, structures like churches with their columns, they would sway and come crashing down. Temples with their thin walls would tend to come crashing down. So after the earthquake, the Islamic records tell us that people digging through the rubble, they found sacred items. And it would be natural for them to gather these items into a large open courtyard, and that was the one around the Kaaba. There it would be safe from things, rocks, and from things from the mountains falling on to that area. So in Petra, it's not too odd that 360 sacred items, including paintings of Jesus, his mother, and Abraham and so forth, would find their way into the open area near the Kaaba. Second, these Hindus claim that the black stone is actually a Shiva object of worship placed in a silver holder. This is a bit more embarrassing to talk about because one of the symbols of Shiva is known as the Shiva Linga. This was made of two parts. The lower part represented a woman's reproductive parts, and the tall stone in the middle represents a male reproductive organ. Shiva teaching focuses on the union and the experience of this act. The worshippers of Shiva pour oil or milk or other liquids over this representation of their god. So when the pagan Hindus hear of a black stone in a silver holder, they think of a Shiva Linga, the silver holder representing the female and the black rock representing the male. And when they see a rounded dome-shaped Betel carved in the side of the mountain, they think of a Shiva Linga. Even though the black rock and the block gods in Petra and these carvings have nothing to do with Shiva. Another symbol associated with Shiva is the crescent-shaped moon in the hair of their idol. So whenever they see a crescent shaped moon there, they think of Lord Shiva. But the crescent shape goes far back into history. Long before Muhammad, records show that the crescent symbol was used by the Midianites as far back as the time of Gideon, hundreds of years before even David and Solomon. In fact, the crescent symbol can be found all over the world. They are not exclusive to Shiva worship or to Muslim worship. It is simply a common pagan symbol. Shiva is also associated with the mountains, and his residence is supposed to be in the Himalaya mountains to the north of India. But then many pagan gods were associated with mountains. All over the world, mountains were often considered the residence where gods were, not just the Petra Mountains. Now, one of the main websites promoting the idea that the Kaaba is a Shiva temple tells us that a coiled-up snake is also a Shiva symbol, and you can see it around Shiva's neck. And then they point to what is known as the Serpent Monument of Petra. And to prove that, they use one of my photographs of this so-called snake monument. Now, the problem here is that the name Snake Monument is a very modern name that tourists have put on a strange-looking stone. This strange shape is actually wind-made and probably made over the last hundreds of years. It originally was one of the square block stones that mark off the entrance to the sacred area. But over time, the soft sandstone was eroded because this rock is very exposed. And in the end, the great block of stone ended up looking like this. So sorry, there's no real snake monument in Petra. It's just a modern nickname for this strange-looking wind-carved rock. Now, Hindus also point to the lion fountain, as lions are also associated with a pagan festival in India. Once again, lions were popular all over the world, the Western world as well. Statues of standing lions were very popular, so just because Petra had some lions doesn't mean it was connected to the festival in India. These Hindu websites and films also point to processional ways through Petra that go up to various large monuments, and they immediately think of their own processions and their own festivals. Likewise, they think that the Hindu festival for Dussehra, which is the name of a god, they think this is one of the names of the gods of Petra, which is Dussehra. And just because they sound similar, they immediately put them together. You see, in the Hindu setting, this is all about the worship of the feminine form, but there's nothing like that related in Petra. These websites identify other gods of worship with Petra as well, and they associate them with their Hindu gods. But then, Hindus have 330 million gods to choose from, although most people only focus on 33 of the most popular. So surely they'll find some god somewhere that is similar to something in Petra. These websites also point to Shiva Durga. This is the worship of Shiva where an animal is sacrificed. And so once again, they point to animal sacrifice in Petra and say, oh look, they're similar. But animal sacrifice is found across the known world, so it's not common only to India. Some of the websites really stretch the point when they notice that the god blocks of stones that mark the sacred area around Masjid al-Haram in Petra were near flowing water, and they immediately think of flowing water of the great Ganges River. I'm sorry, it seems to me that they're really grasping at things here. Some of these blocks are near flowing water, as the Nabateans cut many rock channels through the rock to bring water down into their valley. So when you enter the Petra Valley, the chances are there would be flowing water nearby. But that's not true of all of the great blocks of Petra. Lastly, as they grasp at things, they point to the thousands of dolmens or standing rocks that are found all across Europe, the Middle East, India, even in Asia. And they point out that some of these have like meteorite-like stones set on top of them. And they immediately think that this is evidence of Hinduism all over the world. rather than thinking that perhaps there was a worldwide fear of meteorites falling on them due to some ancient great meteorite shower that may have happened on Earth. Someday I might do a video on this theory of the dolmens and where people would run and hide behind them wherever there was, because there must have been at a time frequent meteorite showers. That's what I think that's all about, but without a worldwide survey I can't conclusively say that. Just an idea, but Hindus point at these. Now, this has gone on long enough. I think you get the general idea. These websites are promoting Hinduism, and these Hindus are seeing something of Hinduism all over the world, even in Petra, and especially in the stone-cut tombs from the side of the mountain. Now, before we get all excited about this, let's consider some of the history of Petra and the Nabatean people in particular. From ancient times, the Nabateans were involved in merchant trade. They were the Arabs that crossed the desert with their camels, and eventually they set up trading places in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in Syria, in Yemen, even in Italy. And they were active merchants with India. What kept them together as a distinct people was their common burial cities. The greatest of these burial cities was the city of Rechem, known to the Greeks and the Romans as Petra, the mother of all settlements, as is written in the Petra Scrolls. It seems, from the evidence, that they would place their dead bodies onto the high locations where birds could come, and they would strip away the flesh, and in the end only the bones were left, and the bones were buried. So the Nabateans from all over the world wanted their bones taken back to the burial city where they could be buried with their family members. And twice a year, as many of the family members as possible would gather together at the great family tombs. There they would eat a meal together in the dining hall cut out of solid rock, and then they would smash the dishes. What does this have to do with India and Lord Shiva? Simply this. When you look at the family tombs in Petra, you can see reflected in the architecture evidence of where those family members were resident merchants. In some tombs, you can see the crow steps, as were popular in Mesopotamian architecture. In some, you can see evidence of Egyptian architecture. In some tombs, you can see Greek architecture, and some are distinctly Roman when you look at them, and sometimes you can even see evidence of Indian influence in the architecture. This is not surprising because these families were based from all over, in all the major cities of the known world at that time. So if you study Roman or Greek architecture, and you come to Petra, you'll see Roman and Greek influence in the architecture of Petra. If you study Egyptian architecture, and you come to Petra, you will see Egyptian influence in the architecture of some of the tombs. So all that's happening is that Indian Hindus, when they see pictures of ancient Petra, they recognize something from India in some of the tomb architecture. But it's the same for everybody. So no, I don't believe that the Arabs in Petra were worshipping Lord Shiva. No, before the coming of Islam, they were pagans, and before that they worshipped one god. And so worshipping multiple gods as pagans is what they eventually developed into. And so pagans in other countries can see and recognize pagan worship in Petra. As far as architecture is concerned, as Dr. Ajay Sharma has asked, yes, there is some Indian influence on some tombs, but not in any major way. The Egyptians built tombs, the Babylonians built tombs, the Indians built tombs, and so in Petra the Nabateans built tombs. But the Nabateans did not have their own architectural style. Their tombs reflect architectural influence from different places all over the world. Now, having said all this, I want to add something more. Reports have come out that in the Sultan's library in Istanbul, in Turkey, there is a book known as Seher Okul, or The Memorable Works. That book refers to a disc that supposedly used to hang in the Kaaba. On the disc were the following words: "Fortunate are those who were born during King Vikram's reign. He was a noble, generous, dutiful ruler, devoted to the welfare of his subjects. But at that time, we Arabs, oblivious of God, were lost in sensual pleasures. Plotting and torture were rampant. The darkness of ignorance had enveloped our country. Like a lamb struggling for her life in the cruel paws of a wolf, we Arabs were caught up in ignorance. The entire country was enveloped in a darkness so intense as on a new moon night. But the present dawn and pleasant sunshine of education is the result of the favor of the noble King Vikram, whose benevolent supervision did not lose sight of us, foreigners as we were. He spread his sacred religion amongst us and sent scholars whose brilliance shone like that of the sun from his country to ours. These scholars and preceptors, through whose benevolence we were again made cognizant of the presence of God, introduced to his sacred existence and put on the road of truth, had come to our country to preach their religion and impart education at King Vikram's behest." Now that, supposedly, is a quote from the book and is speaking about pre-Islamic times. This book also claims that Muhammad's birth was in 552, earlier than what Muslim historians claim, and that he was not born in Mecca in Arabia, but many miles further north. The book also is supposed to claim that classical Arabic was developed not in Saudi, but in the Levant. All of this is claimed in this book, which has never been translated. In fact, I've never seen this book. I don't know of any scholar who's actually seen the book, so maybe it doesn't even exist, but lots of people on the internet are talking about it. So if this book actually exists, and if it does include reference to an Indian king sending scholars and missionaries to the pagans of Arabia before the coming of Muhammad, this could be a link between the Indian religions and the pagan practice that was in place in the years before Muhammad. Again and again, I stress if this book can be found, it may explain some of these practices that were common in early Arabia. For instance, Hindus circle around their holy objects. Hindus shave their heads and their beards, and they wear a special sacred cloth, one around the waist and the other over the shoulder. This is found in India, and it's similar to the rites of the Muslim Hajj that come down to us from pre-Islamic times. So while I doubt that the Kaaba was a Shiva temple in any way, there does seem to be connections between pre-Islamic pagan practices and the pagan rites that are found in India. Now, this is an area that I think needs further research, and I would think it would make a suitable topic for someone's PhD thesis. You see, research has been done around the Jewish connection with Islam, and research has been done around the Aramaic connection with Islam, but no one has yet done a good academic study of Hindu practices and Hindu connection, and how this might have influenced worship during the early years of Islam. It's kind of similar to Nabatean architecture, which shows influence from many different countries and many different places in the world. Perhaps the same applies to their religious forms of worship, and perhaps they gleaned different things from many corners of the world. This might explain something that has puzzled me for many years. In Arabic, the name for Jesus is Yeshua. Much like the Jewish name Yeshua. But in the Quran, Jesus is known as Isa ibn Maryam, or Isa al-Masih. This word, Isa, is not an Arabic word, but it's very close to this word in Sanskrit, Isa, which means Lord. If this is true, then Isa al-Masih is a title, not a name, and it would explain the origins of the word Isa in the Quran. So please, somebody needs to take this up, but it needs to be worked on in Arabic and in Turkish and in Sanskrit. And I'm too old to take on more languages, so I do trust that someone will find this a topic worthy of being their thesis and will do all the research and pull all this material out. I'm Dan Gibson, and this has been another question and answer video.